One of the bikers spit in my yard and said, "Time to sell, Grandpa." Too bad he picked the one house that didn't run. It started just after lunch. I was sipping my usual black coffee on the front porch, watching the wind mess with my tomato plants, when the rumble began. At first I thought it was just someone testing out their truck on the back road, but it kept getting louder, closer, and meaner. Then the noise split into 6 distinct roars: motorcycles. I stood up as the gang rolled right up to the edge of my property, kicking up gravel and dust like they were filming some discount action movie. They weren't subtle. They parked in AV formation like it was some kind of flex, and out stepped a guy with a face that looked like it had been dragged across every bar floor in the county. He had a torn leather vest that said, "Enforcer," a chain around his wrist, and tattoos that looked homemade. Buck Rollins, local trash with an inflated ego. He stepped onto my land without hesitation, leaned against the fence post I had just painted last week, and slapped a folded paper onto the gate. "Violation notice," he growled. "Your fence is 3 inches too high, and your gravel's spilling onto public property. Time to bring it up to HOA code." I didn't respond. I looked down at the paper, then up at Buck. I could smell the tobacco and sweat mix coming off his vest. Behind him, another biker was filming with a phone, and 2 more were doing donuts in the dirt like 10-year-olds on stolen bikes. I took a slow sip of coffee. "You sure you've got the right address?" Buck didn't flinch. "Don't play dumb. You're the only one who hasn't signed on to the community agreement. You think you're special out here? I know I'm not part of your HOA. This property predates it. You'd know that if you could read a map." He stepped forward, close enough for me to count the missing teeth. "Then maybe we'll help you decide to join. Accidents happen out here." One of his buddies cackled and revved his engine again, tossing dust into the air. Another kicked over a metal lawn sign I'd made that said, "Private property, no trespassing." "Nice sign." The biker laughed. "Shame if someone painted over it." Still calm, I pulled out my phone. I didn't even look at the screen, just held it up with the speaker facing them and tapped record. "Hey Boyd," I said into the mic. "Can you check the driveway cams? Got 6 uninvited guests dressed like the world's worst ZZ Top tribute band. I think one of them just threatened me on camera." Buck blinked. The biker filming paused his phone mid-recording. Another one let go of his throttle just long enough to realize I hadn't raised my voice once. Buck leaned in again. "You think a sheriff's gonna help you when you're surrounded by friends?" I pointed to the sky. "You see that little black dot up there? That's a drone. Sends footage straight to the cloud." He glanced up, and I could tell his poker face cracked. "No," I added. "Anyone want lemonade while we wait?" They didn't answer. Buck spat on the grass and backed off like someone had yanked his chain. Once they were gone, I walked the edge of the property. The fence had tire marks up against it, a deep scuff in the gravel where someone tried to dig their boot, and a few cigarette butts by the gatepost. All of it went into a Ziploc bag. Evidence. Back inside, I reviewed the footage. Every move they made, every word they said, was captured on the security system I'd installed last spring. Even their license plates were crystal clear. I wasn't surprised. This wasn't the first time someone from the HOA had tried to muscle me into signing their ridiculous documents. Last month, a guy in a golf cart tried to claim my mailbox violated aesthetics. Before that, someone tossed a fake invoice in my mailbox for road use fees. But this time, they brought backup, 6 growling machines and the kind of men who confuse fear with respect. What they didn't know was that this land used to belong to my grandfather, and it had never been under any HOA jurisdiction. I bought it cash after retiring early. 20 acres, no debt, and no paperwork tying me to their concrete circus of backyard pool inspections and lawn-length ordinances. I wasn't going anywhere, and I sure wasn't going to be bullied out of the only quiet place I had left. Later that afternoon, I made a visit to City Hall. Walked in with a folder marked Legal Property Survey and Deed in one hand, and a USB stick in the other. "Need to speak with someone about HOA harassment," I said calmly to the clerk. She raised an eyebrow. Another one? Turns out, I wasn't the only one getting these biker visits. But I was the only one who came in with video proof. She plugged in the USB and watched a few seconds of Buck's performance. Her lips curled into a small smile. Well, that's colorful. I'd like to file this with the city and lodge a harassment complaint. Also, I want to make sure there's a public record that I'm not under their jurisdiction. The clerk printed out the official declaration and had me sign it. But when I walked out of City Hall, my truck had 2 flat tires. Clean slices? Fresh. I checked the surrounding cameras and found one mounted on the parking structure aimed right at the row I was in. I didn't even swear. Just stood there and said, "So it's going to be like that." I called a tow, got a ride home from a friend, and sat back down on the porch that evening with a fresh cup of coffee. I watched the sunset bleed over the hills and waited for the next move. Because I knew something the HOA didn't. I'd already been in bigger fights. And I didn't need a badge or a gang to finish them. 3 nights later they came back. This time, they didn't bother with fake notices or half-hearted intimidation. They came loud, reckless, and clearly amped up on whatever mix of ego and exhaust fumes fueled them. The deep growl of their bikes rolled through the night like thunder, shaking windows and rattling wind chimes. It was a little after 10 p.m. I had just finished putting away the tools from the shed and was about to turn in for the night. But instead of silence, I got headlights sweeping across my front yard, engines gunning as they tore up the gravel shoulder again like it owed them money. They didn't even pretend to be subtle. 6 bikes, same group, and the same leader, Buck, front and center. He was wearing a different vest this time, one that looked like it had been patched up by someone with one eye closed. The others were more aggressive too, circling my driveway, revving their engines so loud it made the birds scatter out of the tree line. They thought this was fear. They thought they were creating chaos. But to me, it looked like desperation. I stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, holding nothing but a steaming cup of black coffee. My property light cast a long shadow behind me. I said nothing. Just stood there and watched them. That silence seemed to irritate Buck more than anything. He kicked down the stand on his bike and stomped toward me like a toddler about to throw a tantrum. "You think this is over?" he shouted. "You think you're gonna embarrass us and walk away?" I didn't answer. I just took another sip of coffee. Buck raised a chain from his belt and let it dangle between his fingers. "You better start running, old man. I'm done talking." He took one step onto my porch. That was the moment I moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just decisive. I set the coffee mug on the railing, stepped down 2 stairs, and let him swing first. It was a clumsy overhand right meant to intimidate more than hit. His foot was planted wrong, and he had too much shoulder in it. I tilted just slightly to the side. He missed by a full head and smashed his knuckles into the wooden post beside me. I heard something crunch. His face twisted into a scream. I caught his wrist before he could pull away, stepped in, rotated my hips, and flipped him cleanly over onto his back. The chain clattered to the ground. The entire motion took 3 seconds. One of the other bikers, a younger guy with more biceps than brains, rushed forward like he thought this was a bar fight. I sidestepped, grabbed the front of his vest, pulled him forward, and planted my foot behind his ankle. Down he went with a yelp. I didn't hit him. Didn't need to. The earth did the work for me. That's when the chaos paused. The engines idled. The bravado cracked. I looked around slowly at the remaining 4 men. One of them was still sitting on his bike, helmet halfway on, looking like he was reconsidering all of his life choices. Another had started filming on his phone again, but quickly stopped when I locked eyes with him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just spoke calmly. "This is strike 2. And if there's a third, you'll be explaining it from a hospital bed." They didn't move. Buck was groaning on the ground, cradling his wrist like it had turned to jelly. I let him sit there. I had nothing to prove. One of his guys helped him to his feet, and I watched him limp back to his bike with his pride dragging behind him like a busted muffler. That's when Marlene showed up. She pulled up in a pink bathrobe and designer slippers, standing in the middle of the road like she was auditioning for a soap opera. Her hair was wild, and her voice was louder than all 6 motorcycles combined. "What the hell is going on here?" she shouted. "This is private community property. You're violating curfew." I walked to the edge of my yard and held up the bent chain that Buck had dropped. I let it fall to the ground right in front of her. "Your boys are trespassing again, Marlene. I have it all on camera. Same as last time." She stomped toward me, but didn't dare cross the fence line. "This is harassment. You're going to jail for assault." "Call the sheriff," I said. "I already did." Her mouth opened, then closed again like a fish pulled from the water. One of the bikers muttered. He flipped Buck like a folding chair. Marlene shot him a death glare but didn't respond. Just then, my neighbor across the street, Tommy, stepped out with his phone held high. Tommy's a retired cop. He had been filming the entire event from his porch. "I got everything," he said casually. "If anyone wants a copy for court." Buck groaned again from his seat. One of his guys was holding an ice pack from their cooler to his hand. "Let's go," Marlene barked. "Now!" They didn't need a second order. The engines roared to life, and within moments they were tearing off down the street, wobbling slightly from ego damage. Tommy crossed the street, still laughing under his breath. "Man, I thought I was gonna have to jump in." "You were late," I said. "You didn't need me. I haven't seen Buck laid out like that since he tried to sneak into that boxing gym on Main." We both chuckled. I picked up the coffee mug from the porch, still warm. Took a slow sip and watched the last of the tail lights disappear into the trees. "You think they'll come back?" Tommy asked. "They might," I said. "But next time, I'll have the sprinklers ready too." Later that night, I uploaded all the footage to a private backup, sent a copy to Sheriff Boyd with a short note. "Round 2. Waiting on your play." Then I sat on the porch again, watching the stars. No fear, no anger. Just clarity. Because I knew it now. Marlene wasn't going to stop. She was pushing for something bigger, and those bikers were just the muscle. But I had seen this before: push too hard, and you don't just break the rules. You expose the whole dirty game. And if she came for me again, I'd be ready. By the following week, the game changed. No more biker intimidation, no more loud engines or midnight threats. Marlene had gone quiet, but quiet in the way a snake does before it strikes. I'd dealt with people like her before. They always escalate when public noise doesn't work. And sure enough, 3 days later I got a notice in the mail. Certified, official-looking, sealed in a gold-stamped envelope from the HOA's legal team. The letter accused me of obstruction of community development, a completely made-up term wrapped in layers of legal fluff. According to this nonsense, I was deliberately impeding the installation of emergency infrastructure, which was apparently code for the illegal access road they were trying to carve through my land. What tipped it for me wasn't the letter itself. It was the hand-drawn map attached to it. A highlighted red line ran right through the back half of my property. Marlene had submitted a fake survey showing my land as part of a public easement, even though my deed had the original boundary lines notarized and filed decades ago. The gall of it was almost impressive. She wasn't just breaking rules. She was rewriting them. So I gathered everything. I pulled out my grandfather's old deed, every survey done since I inherited the land, the satellite images from the past 5 years, and the footage of the bikers trying to enforce non-existent violations. I even printed out a copy of my neighbor's security cam footage showing the night Buck tried to get physical. Then I typed a letter of my own, calm, factual, and absolutely bulletproof. I submitted it to the city zoning department, and copied the county land board, the sheriff's office, and 3 members of the city council. The response came faster than expected. I was invited to present at the next council session, where an emergency hearing on unauthorized HOA enforcement and land boundary manipulation had just been scheduled. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd filed complaints. The letter mentioned 6 other homeowners from the area, all dealing with sudden citations, suspicious threats, or strange construction near their property lines. Marlene had been busy, but she hadn't counted on someone keeping meticulous records. The council meeting was packed. Not because people cared about boundary lines, but because word had spread about what happened on my porch. The video had made the rounds. Someone added slow motion and music. Buck flipping onto the ground had been turned into a GIF. I wasn't proud of that, but I wasn't sorry either. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice or lean into theatrics. I walked up, handed each council member a folder with my compiled evidence, and spoke like I was explaining plumbing to a child. Simple. Clear. Direct. I read from the actual deed, showed timestamped drone footage of Marlene's hired survey crews sneaking onto my land without permits, and ended by playing a 20-second clip of Buck threatening me on camera while wearing a fake enforcement vest. Then came the twist. One of the younger bikers, the one who had backed off after the fight, showed up at the meeting. Clean shirt, no vest, clearly nervous. When the floor opened for comments, he raised his hand and asked to speak. What he said changed everything. Marlene told us he was dangerous, he said, pointing to me. Said he was some crazy ex-military squatter trying to take over the land. She offered us money to show force. I didn't know it was his property. I thought we were enforcing some real law. A hush fell over the room. Then murmurs. Then gasps. That moment cracked everything open. Other residents started to speak up. A retired schoolteacher described how she was fined for having non-conforming mulch. A man 2 rows behind her said his dog was nearly poisoned after Marlene's people left meat in his yard. The stories poured out, each more absurd than the last. The council didn't need convincing after that. They motioned to freeze all HOA enforcement actions, opened a full audit of their finances, and referred Marlene's case to the district attorney's office. She tried to interrupt several times, yelling about smear campaigns, property values, and neighborhood integrity, but nobody was listening anymore. Her power had evaporated. Back in my neighborhood, the change was almost immediate. The fake citations stopped. The intimidation vanished. And more importantly, the residents started talking to each other again. Turns out, most of them had been dealing with their own private battles against the HOA but were too afraid, or too embarrassed, to say anything. But once the curtain dropped, so did the fear. I helped organize a new neighborhood committee, not an HOA, just a group of people who agreed to actually look out for each other. We focused on real safety, trimming overgrown brush, installing solar lights on walking paths, repairing a shared fence near the creek. No fines. No threats. Just neighbors helping neighbors. As for the back of my land, I reinforced it with a new fence, steel beams, welded gates, motion sensors. Nothing crazy, just enough to remind people that some lines don't get crossed twice. And for good measure, I added a sign at the corner post. It read, "Private property. Not for sale, not for lease, not for HOA." A week later, Buck came slinking back to retrieve something he'd left behind, his chain, or maybe his dignity. He didn't approach the porch this time. Just hovered near the mailbox, avoiding eye contact. I walked out with a thermos of coffee and poured him a cup. He took it, nodded once, and left without saying a word. I didn't need an apology. The way he held his bandaged hand was enough. That evening, as I sat watching the sun melt behind the hills, I thought about how quickly things can shift. One day you're minding your business, planting tomatoes. The next you're dodging fists and flipping thugs in your driveway. But the truth was, I hadn't changed. I just reminded them who they were dealing with. Some people call it standing your ground. I call it protecting peace. And sometimes, peace wears boots.